Hello, welcome to the BBC News at 1. In an extraordinary turn of events this lunchtime, key details of today's budget were released before the Chancellor addressed Parliament. A growth forecast by the Office for Budget Responsibility, which officially analyses government plans, went online before Rachel Reeves stood up to begin her speech to the Commons, which started around half an hour ago. Well, the OBR has apologised and blamed a technical error, but the Chancellor is still on her feet. But thanks to the early publication, we now know that the budget will contain tax rises of £26 billion by the end of the decade. Here are a few of the policies she's been announcing. Personal tax thresholds will be frozen until 2031, meaning more people will end up paying more tax. There'll be a cap on salary sacrifice for pensions, and the two-child cap on universal credit and tax credit will be removed. We also know the Chancellor will introduce measures to tax electric vehicles, 3 pence per mile from 2028. She'll also impose a so-called mansion tax on properties worth more than £2 million from 2028, and she'll freeze fuel duty for a further 5 months. In a moment, we'll speak with our business correspondent Emma Vardy is watching the budget in the UK city of culture, Bradford. And Emma, perhaps, well, definitely more than any other year, we've had a run-up to see how these fiscal changes will affect us all. What are people there having to say? A man has admitted deliberately driving his car into crowds of football fans at the Liverpool FC victory parade in May. The prosecution was about to open its case against 54-year-old Paul Doyle when he pleaded guilty to all 31 charges, including dangerous driving and causing grievous bodily harm with intent. Our correspondent Rowan Bridge was in court. President Trump will send his overseas envoy, Steve Witkoff, to Moscow next week for talks with Vladimir Putin as the US continues to push for a deal to end the war in Ukraine. The meeting follows days of negotiation over a peace plan which was initially more favourable to Russia. In a moment, we'll speak with James Waterhouse. Next, imagine having one of the world's most famous dance floors all to yourself. Ron and Marilyn Hill used to be regulars at the Blackpool Tower Ballroom, but they hadn't been there for decades. So their family wanted to give them one last waltz at the venue before Ron's dementia got worse. And it did lead then to a very special visit. Our correspondent, Jay McCubbin, was there. To Westminster, and an extraordinary turn of events as key details of today's budget were released before the Chancellor even addressed Parliament. A growth forecast by the Office for Budget Responsibility, which officially analyses government plans, went online before Rachel Reeves even stood up to begin her speech in the Commons. The OBR then apologised and blamed a technical error, but the budget contains tax rises of around £26 billion by the end of the decade. Here are a few of the policies that have been announced. So personal tax thresholds will be frozen until 2031. That means more people will end up paying more tax. There will be a cap on salary sacrifice for pensions, and the two-child cap on universal credit and on tax credit will be removed. From 2028, electric vehicles will be taxed 3%, and a so-called mansion tax will be imposed on properties worth more than £2 million from 2028, and fuel duty has been frozen for a further 5 months. There'll also be a 2% tax increase on property, savings and dividends, as well as limits to cash ISAs. The full £20,000 allowance will remain, but for anyone under the age of 65, £8,000 of this will now be designated exclusively for investment purposes. We're also expecting changes to household energy costs. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to Henry Zeffman in Westminster, but first our economic to Westminster and hear from our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth. And Alex, there were all sorts of twists and turns in the long build-up to this budget, but the real drama came the hour before she even stood up. Yeah, but Alex, that early leak did mean that we saw the markets react in a positive way, suggesting they believe the outlook is more positive economically. To what extent will that trickle down towards households, that feeling of positivity, if you like? Well, that is the axis which continues across BBC News and BBC News Online. For now, though, let's check in with Helen and a look at the weather with some glorious frost behind you. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.